Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new to my channel, hello, my name is Gabby and welcome. So I told you guys on my story here on YouTube a few days ago that I was going to be starting a new series on my channel, and today is the first video in that series. It's a series that I've been going back and forth with for probably a couple months now as to whether I even wanted to start it or not. I can't say it was 100% original idea. I was inspired by a few people. For instance, Bailey Sarian. She does her murder mystery and makeup Mondays. Basically where she puts on makeup and talks about true crime cases. Also, Stephanie So, she does mukbangs and talks about true crime cases. Well, I took those ideas and I was like, okay, well, I want to do something also. Do something on camera that's a hobby of mine or something I enjoy doing, and also talk about a true crime case. For me, my thing is drawing. I used to draw every single day. A few years ago, I do commissions for people, and the harder that I worked on my channel, the less that I drew in my free time, because I was so consumed with trying to get videos out and trying to do research, and I didn't really have the free time to draw anymore. So I figured I would combine the two things that I love so very much, which is my channel and talking about these cases and you guys and getting content out for my subscribers, and also my love for art. So I'm going to be starting a series on my channel. It's not going to be every single video, but I'm going to sit down, I'm going to do a little sketch of the victim that I'm talking about while also telling their story. I figure it's a pretty respectful way to get their story out, also kind of paying homage to them. Even though I'm not the best artist ever, I still think, you know, drawing somebody is a very sentimental thing. So that's what I'm doing, and I hope it works out. So with all that being said, let's get right into the video. So I don't really use any professional blending tools. I basically just use Q-tips or tissues, but today I'm using regular Q-tips and pointed Q-tips for smaller details. As for pencils, I use the Prismacolor graphic pencils, the turquoise ones, and I basically just stick to HB, 2B, 4B, and 8B. I have my outline already done just because it takes me so long to do. It would genuinely be like half my sketching time. As you can tell with her left eye, I had to erase like 10 times. Getting the facial features right has always been a weakness of mine. I get it eventually, but it just has always taken me so long. So the outline is basically already done, and the picture in the corner of the video is the one that I am going off of. I have my computer up in front of me, but it's out of the view of the camera. So let's start sketching and hop right into the case of Annie Doe. On August 19th of the year 1971, a traveling man and his son were in the woods in Josephine County off the Redwood Highway around Marker 35. This area is known as a dump, located near the California-Oregon border about 7 miles from Grants Pass, Oregon. They had spent the night nearby and went into the woods to quickly relieve themselves. Little did they know that they would end up being the ones to find the remains of a young girl who would remain unidentified for almost 5 decades. The son came across a scapula, then a skull. Her skeletal remains were scattered and covered in debris. Police were notified. Based on the young girl's remains, it was guessed she had been deceased for several months by the time she was found. She was skeletonized besides the tiny bit of scalp and hair left on the skull. Some were uncertain if it was murder or not, but to most it was obvious, and it was eventually ruled to be a homicide, with Sheriff Bill Brandt saying, "Young girls simply don't go into the woods and die. The possibility of foul play is something we've got to check out." Josephine County Sheriff's investigators did all they could with the technology they had in the early 1970s to identify the young girl, but all their efforts seemed to go nowhere. They couldn't find out who she was, how she died, or where she had come from. All leads hit a dead end, and within a short period of time, the case was categorized as inactive. Her remains were placed in storage, and she was classified as a Jane Doe. Time went on like it does, and there was a rise in what we call cold case detectives. Detectives with the hopes that all the advancements in technology will lead to older cases finally being solved. In August of 2004, cold case detectives decided to look at this Jane Doe's case again. Forensic artist Joyce Nagy created a clay facial reconstruction of the unidentified female. Joyce gave her the name Annie Doe because she had auburn brown hair with blonde dyed streaks. The auburn reminded Joyce of the character Annie from the musical production Annie. Annie Doe had several distinct physical characteristics. For one, her teeth were in fact a tad crooked, and her front teeth protruded quite a bit. She had amalgam fillings in 4 of her molars, and based on the development of her 3rd molar, she was said to be between 14 to 22 years old. It was thought that she may have had brown eyes. She stood somewhere between 5 feet 2 inches tall and 5 feet 9 inches tall. She weighed about 125 pounds. Annie Doe was not found naked. Her remains were clothed, and she had some interesting jewelry on her as well. She was wearing a pair of Wrangler jeans and a light-colored turtleneck sweater with a zipper on the back. She also had on a checkered houndstooth waist-length coat with alternating colors of pink and brown. It also had a little belt on it. Her shoes were dark brown, Prim-style brand flats with gold buckles, size 8.5. She was wearing a size 34B bra and striped purple, blue, and white underwear. As for jewelry, she had on 2 very unique pieces, both rings. The first ring was a silver ring that had the words Sterling MH engraved on the inside. This type of ring is often used as a friendship ring or pre-engagement band for a relationship. The next was a knotted band ring with a mother-of-pearl stone. It also had the initials AL scratched into the stone. Years later, those initials would be found out to belong to none other than Annie Doe herself. Not far from her body, they also found a map of Northern California camping facilities, so it was theorized that she may have been on her way to California. In late 2016, forensic isotope testing was done on Annie's hair, teeth, and bones, and it was guessed that she may have come from the northeast portion of the United States, most likely New England, and made her way to the Pacific Northwest. In 2017, a new case study for her was funded by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and would be done through the DNA Doe Project. I've discussed the DNA Doe Project tons of times before on my channel. It is a foundation that uses DNA genealogy to identify John and Jane Does. In that same year of 2017, a new artist rendering was done of Annie Doe by artist Carl Koppelman, somebody that I've also talked about quite a few times on my channel before as well. Annie Doe was entered into the system that the DNA Doe Project uses, which is gedmatch.com. Her DNA was entered in November of 2018 by forensic anthropologist Dr. Nichi Vance of the Oregon State Medical Examiner's Office, who at the time had custody of Annie Doe's remains. After weeks and weeks of careful analysis, some of Annie's family was traced through DNA to relatives, mostly cousins in England, New Zealand, and Canada. Then there was a potential match found to a woman who turned out to be a half-niece of the victim. The half-niece claimed on her genealogy profile online that she had a half-aunt that was born in 1954 who disappeared as a teenager, and the family figured that she was dead. And this led them to a woman living in Washington State. This woman was Annie Doe's biological sister. They did a DNA test and it was a full match. On March 12th of 2019, only last year, it was announced to the public that Annie Doe was finally identified. In my personal opinion, one of the craziest things that I've ever heard of happen in a Jane or John Doe case actually happened in this case of Annie Doe, and that is that every single Jane and John Doe, for the most part, is given a name, or they're given a number, but most often they're given a name. The names given to the Jane and John Does are usually given to them by somebody who is in charge of the case or locals who know about the case. It usually goes off of a physical characteristic or the area that they were found in, just something having to do with the Jane or John Doe that really keeps them separated from the rest of the Jane and John Does, something that is unique to them. This Jane Doe was given the name Annie Doe by Joyce Nagy, and come to find out, Annie Doe's actual name was Anne, and her family most often called her Annie. That's just crazy to me. Annie Doe was Anne Marie Lehman. She was a 16-year-old girl from Aberdeen in Washington State. She had went missing from her home sometime in either winter or spring of 1971. What happened to Annie before her demise is still a mystery to this day. From what I personally read online, Annie had kind of a difficult childhood, and personality-wise, she was a bit shy and reserved. Both her parents and her brother passed away before she was ever identified. The only person really left is her older sister, Virginia. When Detective Ken Selig talked to Virginia in person the time he went to collect her DNA to compare it to Annie Doe's, she gave a bit of a backstory. Her, Annie, and their brother were the children of Albert and Norma Lehman. Their father, Albert, was a Canadian World War II veteran, and Norma was an English woman who had met Albert while he was stationed in Sussex, which explains how Annie had relatives in both Canada and England. The three children and their parents moved to Canada together for some time and eventually settled in Aberdeen, Washington. Virginia said their childhood was sad. She said their father was an alcoholic who left for months at a time, leaving his family poor and hungry. She said her younger sister possessed a lot of anger growing up. She became involved in recreational drug use. I'm not entirely sure what kind of drugs, if it was just marijuana or if it was harder drugs, but Virginia said her younger sister's main objective was to get out of her house, to get away from her family home. So when the opportunity came for her to do that, she did it. The last her sister Virginia remembers was that one day when she came back to her family home, she saw Annie packing luggage. Virginia asked where she was going, and Annie replied with her and pointed to a slightly older woman who was in the room. Virginia didn't know who this woman was. About 10 days after Annie left home, her sister received a postcard. It was from Annie, and it read, "I'm with my boyfriend. Don't go looking for me. I love you." Virginia said Annie wasn't one to express emotions at all, and she would have never signed it with, "I love you." So Virginia and her husband tried to track Annie down. First, they tracked down the woman Annie was with the day she was packing. The woman told them that she was given a new wardrobe and a car to sell Annie into prostitution. I couldn't find any information on how Virginia and her husband reacted to this, but I can guarantee hearing this from the woman, they were extremely, extremely angry. A lot of people are probably wondering if Annie was ever reported missing. She was never reported missing because police didn't do that at the time. After the news of a positive identification was let out to the public and Annie's photo was spread around online, some people came forward saying they vaguely remembered her from Miller Junior High School and Aberdeen High School. To me, it didn't seem like a lot of people had very prominent memories of her. Usually when someone's finally identified, a lot of people who knew them come forward and are thankful that their lost friend was finally found and can be laid to rest in their hometown where they belong. That isn't really the case with this case. Annie seemed very quiet and seemed like she didn't have a lot of friends, which makes this case that much sadder. She was obviously troubled, most of it stemming from her rocky upbringing. Annie's remains were sent back to her family to be buried in a cemetery where she was from. Detective Selig said that he offered to send Virginia flowers for the memorial they had for Annie, and she said to not send flowers. She wanted him to instead plant a tree. That it was only appropriate because Annie was found amongst the trees. We're gonna take it back to Annie's clothing and jewelry though for a second that she was found in, because when it comes to people who knew her, they said that they don't remember Annie owning any of the clothing that she was found wearing or any of the jewelry. Her sister said that her sister Annie never wore jewelry and nobody had ever seen these items of jewelry before. Not one person who knew Annie before she disappeared said that they remembered her wearing these items of jewelry. Now there is a theory about the jewelry though. The mother of pearl ring in particular, that possibly she sketched her initials into the stone to leave some sort of a clue as to who she was if something happened to her, whether it be because of human trafficking or maybe hitchhiking. Maybe Annie was sold into human trafficking, a prostitution ring, something of that sort, and this ring was given to her along the way. Maybe she found it somewhere. but it came into her possession somehow, and maybe she wanted to etch her initials on it to give somebody a better idea of who she was if something were to happen to her and her body was found. If you remember, I mentioned that after the isotope testing, they thought Annie Doe had come from New England and traveled west. She was never in New England and had no connection to New England. So in fact, this proves that isotope testing is not always going to give you the best answer as to where a person may have been or where they had come from before they passed away. This case has very little information online. I spent quite a few hours trying to gather as much as I could. There just isn't a lot of information when it comes to this case, but it's one that I obviously wanted to cover nonetheless, just like with every case that I cover on my channel. I followed Annie Doe's case though for quite a few years, even before she was identified. If you're somebody who keeps up with John and Jane Doe cases, it's always very surreal after looking at the post-mortem photos of them, if they are online, or the artist renderings of them for so long, and then you finally see a picture of them. It is just, it's so crazy to finally see what they actually looked like when they were alive, and that was kind of how it was for me with this case. I remember when she was first identified last year, I just kind of stared at her picture for like 5 to 10 minutes straight. It's like I couldn't stop looking at what she actually looked like. I mean, the DNA Doe Project does such amazing work when it comes to identifying people. I feel like every single month I see someone new has been identified because of their hard work. If it wasn't for them, Annie and many others would have never got their names back. Even though Annie Doe has been identified, her case of death was ruled a homicide, which means the person or people responsible for taking her life are possibly still out there, and that is the next step, to try to find that person or them. Detective Selig says the investigation is far from over, and that every time he drives past marker 35 on the highway, all he sees in his head is Annie, and it pushes him even more to solve her case fully. Also, the crazy thing about Detective Selig is he actually retired in the year 2012 and continues to work on her case for free. And I gotta say, go Detective Ken Selig, because it is people like you that get these cases solved. People that work hard because they have a love for it. Anyone who knows of any information concerning Annie Marie Lehman, age 16 at the time of her disappearance, and her activities in the years 1970 and 1971 is urged to contact Detective Selig of the Josephine County Sheriff's Office at 541-474-5123. The case number is 71-940. So before I go, I want to mention one little thing that I found out not that long ago, and I feel like it fits perfectly into this case. It's something that I've wanted to mention for a while, but this is the case that I feel like I should put this bit into. I recently came across this information, but the bus line Greyhound offers free bus tickets to runaways who want to go back home. They have provided more than 16,000 free tickets to runaway kids since it began working with the National Runaway Safe Line back in the year 1995, almost 25 years ago. A person interested in a free ticket back home must call the number 1-800-RUNAWAY. They have to be between 12 to 21 years old. They must be listed on a runaway report, and their family must be willing to take them back in when they get home. Half of runaways are actually running away from home because they were kicked out. So if families are willing to take the child back in through Greyhound, the National Runaway Safe Line actually works with the families to provide resources, to provide support once the child is back home. I'm all for anything that helps save a life, so I just wanted to kind of put that into this video real quickly. But anyways, this is my final drawing of Annie Lehman right here. It took about 35 minutes. I am happy with it. It's probably been like 3 months since I've drawn anything, so I definitely have to get back into it. Let me know what you guys think of my little sketch down below. I would love to fill this entire sketchbook up with different drawings of victims. That would take a very long time, but I mean, you never know how long I'll be here on YouTube for. So if there's any vintage cold cases that you want me to cover and possibly draw the victim, definitely let me know down below in the comments. And if you're not already, make sure to hit that subscribe button because it really helps your girl out, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye guys.